of our course Sociolinguistics. Today we are going to continue chapter 7, where we talk about young children and the elderly or the old people. In this lecture we will discuss language characteristics of the under 5 and over 65 people. We will talk about child-directed language. We will also consider similarities between child-directed language and elder-directed language. Then we will end this lecture by answering the question of why might there be similarities between child-directed language and the language used by the old people. So, language characteristics of the under 5s and over 65 people. Language characteristics of the under 5. What are the basic characteristics of the language that we use when we communicate with children who are under the age of 5? Now, one of the basic characteristics of this language is the pitch of their voice, which is usually quiet and high relative to that of adults. So if you compare the pitch of our voice or the pitch of our sounds when we communicate with little children, you will find that it is very high compared to the pitch of voice which we use when we communicate with adults. So the child-directed language, or which we are going to symbolize as CDL, have a high pitch sound, especially when we compare this with the language used to communicate with adults. Number 2, their early pronunciation of words can be quite different from the adult version. Now, sometimes when you have a child speaking, you will find that the pronunciation of certain words that he pronounces are very much different from those pronounced by an adult. The difference can be in the pronunciation of vowels. The difference can be in the strength of the pitch, and in the quality of the sound and the intensity of the sound that a child usually produces. In general, their early pronunciation of words is very much different from the pronunciation of an adult. So this is basically some of the basic characteristics of the children who are under 5. Now we move to some of the characteristics of people who are over 65. Well, basically the over 65 people are experienced language users. Well, unlike the children who are not yet able to control the use of their language. So people who are of an age over 65 are considered experienced language user. Secondly, older people may require slightly processing time to produce and understand complex sentences. So when an old man speaks, or when a man who is over 65 speaks, you will notice that he or she requires slightly longer processing time to understand and to produce a complex sentence, which means that their ability of processing language has declined, so they need even a little bit longer time to process language, and especially when the sentence they process is a compound sentence, where processing a simple sentence will take a lesser time compared with a sentence consisting of more than one clause, or a sentence where we have a longer noun phrase or a longer verb phrase. So this again means that there is a decline in the human being ability of processing language when he becomes old, or when he is over 65 years old, and this is manifested. This is clear when people or old people take longer time for processing compound sentences or complex sentences. Number 3, hearing often becomes less acute as people get older, and this can lead to reduced understanding of rapid or whispered speech, and it can lead to speech in an it can lead to reduced understanding of speech in a noisy environment. So our ability of hearing sound become less and less when we are old, so it declines gradually as we get older, and this will lead us to have an effect on our understanding of rapid speech, of rapid conversation, and especially when somebody is whispering where we cannot really understand or process the sentence that he or she speaks, and we will find difficulty in understanding speech in a noisy speech being held in a noisy environment. This again proves that hearing ability of a human being will decline when they become older. Number 4, the aging of the vocal cords and muscles controlling breathing and facial movement results in slower speech. Again, because whatever sound we produce are the result of vocal cords, whether they vibrate or not vibrate. So when those vocal cords become old, or when they age, they become affected by age, and in addition to the aging of the muscles controlling our breathing and controlling our facial movement, this will lead to us speaking very slowly, and our ability to speak will also be different from the ability of a young person or a young child or an adult. So again, aging of vocal cords, aging of muscles controlling facial expression and facial movement will result in our ability of speech, where we will be able to speak slowly. We move to child-directed language, and the abbreviation CDL stands for C for child, directed D, and language L. So when I say CDL, I mean child-directed language. Sometimes the child-directed language is called baby talk, which refers to the talk that children who are under the age of 5 would speak, and sometimes the same term is called motherese, and this refers to the mother, because when you acquire your language, you acquire this from your mother, so it is the language that's used by mother which is the basis of the language that you speak, and that's why we call it motherese. Now, what is the definition of child-directed language, or what's the definition of CDL, or if you like, what's the definition of motherese or baby talk? Child-directed language is a special style used in speech to young children. So imagine yourself talking to a child. Of course, you will not be talking in the same way that you talk to your friend. You need to speak slowly, you need to emphasize words so that the child can understand, because his ability to understand, his ability to process languages is very different from yours. So this is what we mean by the language of the child, or we call it child-directed language, which is a special style used in speech to young children. What are the basic characteristics of the CDL, or child-directed language? We have in fact more than one characteristic of the CDL, calling the child by name, often using a bit name or a term of endearment. So usually we call a child darling, dear, or honey. So those terms which child usually like to hear, or the child which is a characteristic of the language that we use when we speak to young children. Again, we use shorter, grammatically simpler sentences when we communicate with younger children. Of course, when you talk to your little child, or when you talk to your little brother, the language that you are going to use is simple. You are not going to use very complex grammatical structures, but we use short sentences, simple sentences, sentences which are grammatically easy for the child to process, grammatically simple for the child to understand. So shorter grammatical simple sentences. Again, you also use repetition, because it is expected from a child not to understand from the first time, so you need to repeat whatever you tell him, so that you make sure that he got the message, or he understood what you have told him. So these are just some of the characteristics of the language, of our language, when we communicate with little children. Again, it is clear that more use of a question or question tag is there in the child-directed language, where we always tend to ask the little child, okay, do you understand? Do you want this? Are you happy with that? So we have all this type of a question that we, from now, for every now and then, ask the little child or the young child to answer those questions. We also use baby talk words which are specific to children who are under 5, and again we expand on and or finishing the child's utterance. When a child says a sentence and he stumbles, he is unable to continue, we can fill the gap, we can help him express or expand whatever he says by providing him with some vocabulary that he can use to continue or to complete or to finish the utterance he is saying. So those are some of the characteristics of the child-directed language that we use when we make conversation with little children. Then we move to characteristics of the sound of the CDL. What's the characteristics of our sound when we communicate with little children, or when we use CDL, the child-directed language? Well, of course, we will use a high-pitched sound. The pitch of our sound will be higher than it is when we communicate with adult people. We will be speaking very slowly. It will be slower speed. We will not speak as quickly as we can, because we expect that the child needs a longer time than an adult to process our language. So we speak as slowly as possible for when we communicate with little children. And it is also noticeable when we communicate, or when we have a little conversation with younger children, we pause a lot. There are more pauses. We stop for a very short time in our speech, practically between phrases, practically between little clauses or small or simple sentences. We stop between one sentence and another, so that the child can understand that this is the end of this sentence, this is the end of this idea, so that he can process this sentence or that sentence, and takes enough time to process whatever we say to him. Next characteristics of this sound is that the pronunciation of the vocabulary will be clear, will be more distinct. So we exaggerate the pronunciation so that the listener, who is the child, will be able to accurately perceive whatever we tell him. So the pronunciation of the vocabulary is very clear. It is more distinct than usual, so that the child can understand and can distinguish what words we are talking about. So another characteristics of the sound of the child-directed language is that we use clearer pronunciation. We use distinct pronunciation, a pronunciation which a child can distinguish one word from another. It is not rapid pronunciation. There is no contraction. There is no assimilation, where we can always emphasize certain vocabulary so that the child can understand what we are saying. Exaggeration or exaggerated intonation. Example, a very prominent rising tone used for questions. So it is known that in English, when you want to ask a question, you can do this by using one statement and with a rising intonation. So if you say, for example, you speak English, this is a statement. But if you say the same sentence with a rising intonation, you are making this statement as a question. So if I say, you speak English, this is a normal sentence, it is a statement. But if you say, you speak English, so this is a question because the intonation is rising. So when you speak to a child, this intonation is exaggerated. You giving a prominent rising intonation to the sentence so that the child understand that this is a question, this is not a normal affirmative or normal sentence. So in fact you exaggerate intonation and you give a very prominent rising tone when you ask questions. Then we move to the characteristics of young children conversation with their parents. When a child or a little child or a young child holds a conversation with his father and mother, when there is a conversation between parents and their children, what are the characteristics of the language used in this conversation? Young children are usually perceived to be incompetent turn takers. So usually in a conversation, somebody speaks, then another person will take turn. So it is not only one person who speaks in a conversation, everybody needs to participate. Everybody has a turn to say one sentence or two sentences. Now in a conversation between parents and young children, children are known or perceived to be incompetent turn takers. They do not know where to take turn in a conversation. They can interrupt people, they can speak when you are speaking at the same time so that you do not understand what is being said. So young children are perceived as incompetent turn takers. They do not know when to take turn in conversation. They do not know when to participate when conversation is happening. They might speak while their father or while their mother is speaking. They might speak at the same time that their parents are speaking. The younger the child, the more likely their attempt to initiate a new topic will be ignored by older speakers. So a younger child, when he or she initiates a topic, this topic does not usually find attention from the side of his parents because they think he's still young, he cannot initiate those topics. So usually the more topic he initiates, they are ignored by older or young or parents or adult speakers. The younger the children, the more likely they are to be interrupted or overlapped. So again, in a conversation between parents and children, if the child is under 5 or even he is 3 or 4 years old, where he is recently start to use one word and one sentence and start to involve himself in conversation, usually the younger he is, the more he is interrupted, or the more his sentences are overlapped, where the parents can talk ignoring what he said, or they talk at the same time he talks, where in fact they are ignoring the topics that he initiates. There is a high proportion of directive and instructive talk from adults. So usually in a conversation between parents and young children, the parents usually give directive, give instruction, and the word directives means imperative. When they say do that, don't do this, be careful, do not close the door, bring this, open the door, close the window. This is what I call directive language, a language which the speaker gives direction, the speaker gives imperative to the listener, or give instruction where he uses the imperative to instruct or to give direction to the listener. So there is a high proportion, there is a large number of directives in the conversation of young children and adults or parents. The similarity between child-directed language and the elder-directed language. Now, if we compare an old person with a person who is under 5, we will find that there is a similarity between the language used for old people and the language used for young children. There is in fact similarity in the content of the conversation. There is similarity in the sound of the conversation, and there is similarity in the ways speakers communicate or interact. So let us first consider similarity in the content of the talk. The similarity in the content of the talk is represented by simpler sentences, where if you are talking to an old man or you are talking to a young child, you need to use simpler sentences, some sentences which are not complicated, sentences that a child can process and an old person or a person who is over 65 can easily process. Again, you ask them more questions. You always ask them, do you understand? Are you following? Do you like this? Be careful, don't do that. So there is more questions. Again, one of the characteristics of the similarity in the content of the conversation is that it is repetitive, where you repeat more than one time whatever you say to the child, or more than one time to whatever you say to the old man. So you repeat more than one time because the child need the sentence to be said to him more than one time. Similarly, for an old person, because he has difficulty processing language, you need to always repeat whatever you say to him. The use of pet names, which is when you call a little child my dear, my honey, or any other name that he or she prefers. So this is one characteristics or one common point between the child-directed language and the elderly directed language, where in both languages you use pet names or names we call endearing names. We move to the similarity in the sound of the talk. So there is something in common with regard to the sound of the language used for young children, for people who are over 65. The sound is a high-pitched sound. It is a low speed. The speaker speaks slowly, again because as we said, our ability to understand language declines by age. So if we speak slowly, this will help the child and will help the old man to process language, and we need to exaggerate intonation so that they understand this is a question or this is a sentence. So we have three main points which are considered similar in the sound of the conversation for children and for old people. So high pitch and slower speed and exaggerated intonation. Similarity in the ways the speakers interact. Both when the speakers are old people and little children, both of them usually interrupt the speech sound. Both of them will speak at the same time the other speaker does. So they interrupt each other, they interrupt the speaker, they speak at the same time the first person speaks. Also their sounds overlap. When they speak at the same time, and their sentences overlap. You do not understand who is saying what and what everybody is saying. So there is an overlapping in the conversation and the vocabulary. Young children and people over 65 say or speak. They also tend to treat people's contribution as irrelevant to the conversation. So they do not really pay attention to whatever they say to one another, or they do not pay attention to the speaker's contribution because they consider this is irrelevant to the conversation. Again, both of them would use directive language. They use instruction, they use imperative of do this, do that, be careful, close the door, open the window. Those sentences which express imperative, express directive, express instructions. Those images shows how children can interrupt the speech of the adults or of their parents. And again, and the other image shows how speech conversation have been overlapping with one another. Why do we use children-directed language? Why we use this specific style of language with children? Number one, parents used it as a language teaching tool. So when you want to teach your child, you tend to use this style of language. You tend to make your language slower, you exaggerate the pronunciation, and you also emphasize the intonation of the question, where there is a prominent rising tone when you make a question. So we use this language as a tool for teaching. So you try to teach your child the certain or specific points. So you tend to use this style of language, which we call child-directed language. So parents tend to use this language as a tool for educating or for teaching their children. We also use the CDL to ensure understanding children who are not fully competent language users. Now, because we assume that a child is incompetent, he is unable to control his language, he is not an experienced language user. We assume that a young child is unable to use language to the best effect. So we use CDL to ensure understanding of those children, because we assume that they are incompetent language users. Number three, child-directed language asserts the power of caregiver in relation to the child. Usually a caregiver, it can be either a babysitter or can be one of the parents, which they give care, they care for the child. So when they use the child-directed language, they can assert their power position, because this language, they can always use directive, they can always give commands. Don't do this, don't do that, close the door, open the window. So by using this directed language, the language which is full of sentences that indicate power, by allowing the caregiver or the babysitter to command the child by telling him to do this and not to do that, by using instructions, by using directive, he or she is asserting his power as a caregiver or the power as a babysitter in relation to the child. Again, using child-directed language would reflect the affection and nurturance toward the recipient and the willingness to accommodate to their needs. Now, when I accommodate my language so that the child can understand, when I speak slowly so that an old man can understand what I say, this means that I'm willing, that I am ready to accommodate my language to the need of this young child, to the need of this old man, or to the need of this old man who is over 65, which reflects my affection, which reflect my interest, which affect my nurturance toward the recipient. The recipient here can either be a young child or can be a very old man. So this shows that I'm ready, I am willing to understand, to accustom my language to the language of the young child or the old man. Why might these similarities occur? Now, we have found that there is similarity between the language directed to the child and the language directed to the old man or to the person who is over 65. Why there is this number of similarities? Number one, this language use could be connected to cultural expectation and stereotypes about people in these groups. Now, the word stereotypes means that when I have a child who is under 6 years old or under 5 years old, I would stereotype him as being unable to understand everything. So his image in my mind, or her image in my mind, is that he is unable to understand everything. So I need to accommodate my language so that he can understand what I say. And if I say, oh, it is an old man, the image that comes to my mind that this is a fragile person, I need to accommodate my language so that he can understand whatever I say. So I tend to use high-pitched sound. I tend to speak slowly so that he can understand. I tend to use simple sentences rather than compound sentences. So what does that mean? That this connected with our cultural expectation of young children, our cultural expectation of old people, and we stereotype them as being unable to process language. So we use this specific style of language so that they understand whatever we say to them, which again reflects our willingness to help and to accommodate our language to their need. Number two, experiments have shown that speakers with an elderly voice tend to be rated as vulnerable. They are easily hurt, they are forgetful and incompetent more often than speakers with young voices. So sometimes when you hear somebody talking and you realize that this voice is a voice of an old man, we naturally tend to rate this person as being vulnerable, and we say, oh, he's a very old man, he might forget easily, he forgets things very easily, he is an incompetent user of the language. But if we hear a person whom we judge his voice as being young, we will not say that he's vulnerable or forgetful or incompetent. But if the voice belongs to an old man, our assumption, our cultural expectation is that this voice belongs to an old man who is incompetent, he forgets things very easily, and so on and so forth. Number three, expectation of the elderly having a decline in physical and mental capacity. So we have the expectation that the more we get old, the more our physical and mental capacity declines. So the older we are, the more our capacity declines. So when you are at your 60s and 70s year old, your ability, your physical ability, your mental ability will gradually decline. So we expect an old man to have started the decline of his physical ability, his mental ability. So we use a language that suit his abilities and suit her ability. Similarly, when we know this is a child, we know that his ability of mastering language is not good enough. We also accommodate ourselves so that he can understand whatever we say to him. We use this slow language, we use high-pitched sound, we use prominent tone in asking a question so that he understands this is a question, this is not a sentence. This in fact brings us to the end of this lecture. Thank you very much.